All right, now, well, to discuss the crime stats even further, we're now joined by the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Bheki Cele. Also, Seoul City's Institute's Fina Kodisang joins us, including the Institute of Race Relations, Gerbrand van Heerden. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time.
Pleasure.
I mean, let's talk about this battle against crime in South Africa. Selby, let me start with you. Are we losing this battle?
Certainly, we're losing it. In fact, the problematic part of the statistics is that they're also not gendered. As you would note here, we are not sure how many women, for an example, have been killed in the past year, how many girls. We just have numbers. That's the first thing. The second one is that also, as you would note, that for the past 2 years, we have seen school being sites of violent places. And as a result, this does not necessarily speak to young people. What does it speak? It tells us. That's the second issue. The third one is the whole issue of urban violence, issues of protest, and so forth and so on. The last one is the issue around how do we speak to, how do these statistics speak to the issue when most of these violent or murders occurs around weekends, and they need to take us through that. So they're not necessarily detailed, but also it's also comforting that even the minister is also obliged to say that certainly there's a crisis. So we're in a national crisis that we need to begin as a society to start conversing around.
Right. And Fina, can we trust these statistics? SLB has raised concerns about some of the details and dynamics around, the statistics that we've seen which are missing. But for me, what was quite also concerning was the number that we've seen under sexual offences. Yes, it's risen. It's at an increase. It's a concern. But what about those that are unreported? How do we account for those?
Yeah. I think the problem is that those are not reported. So even when they say it has increased, we don't know the magnitude to which it has increased. And it's a problem that it has increased because when are we going to see action being taken? When is prevention going to kick in? When are we stopping curative, care in South Africa where you must get raped first, then we will respond? So it's a worrying thing that the numbers are increasing, and we are happy to report that the numbers have increased. It's one too many that they are happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Gerbrand, I want to bring some of the stats to you. We're seeing murder here increasing from, 2016 from 19,000 to approximately 22,000 sexual offences, from 49,000 in 2016, 2017 to 52,000. Clearly there are loopholes in our justice system. Where are we getting it all wrong?
Firstly, I think what is happening is the socio-economic circumstances that we find ourselves in at the moment. We have an unemployment rate based on the expanded definition of nearly 40%. We have one of the highest inequality rates in the world. It is, when you look at countries with a very high inequality rate, that usually is accompanied with a high murder rate as well. So, for example, countries such as Botswana, Lesotho, El Salvador, Belize. It's definitely a poverty and inequality issue as well. And that, of course, then leads to a breakdown in the family fabric or the social fabric. That's why we see an increase in domestic violence. That's why we see increase in alcohol and drug abuse during the weekends, which then leads to murder, rape, assault. Yes, murders for women are down, but the incidences of common assault, sexual offences, these crimes disproportionately affect women, and that has risen steadily. And it's quite sad that just after Women's Day and Women's Month, these figures had to come out.
It's been a tragic month indeed, especially for a month that's meant to celebrate women. But let's take a look at some of those stats that are on full screen now. And I see there in front of me that the crime stats sexual offences from 2017-2018 were at 50,000 rand, 50,000 rather, and 2018-2019 at 52,000. Selby, one thing that Minister Bheki Cele mentioned was that there's a clear case of lawlessness in the country. What do you think attributes to that? Because it's one thing to talk about the involvement of the police, what they're doing wrong, but also as South African citizens, what is going wrong? What is it about our law system that we don't respect?
I think it links to what my colleague has just said. I mean, the drivers of violence, you know, the issues of inequality. South Africa is the highest in the world around issues of inequality. So social exclusion breeds, you know, violence. So that's the issue that we need to begin to speak to as a society. But I just wanted to ride on what my colleague has just said around the issue of the detailed nature of the statistics. For an example, there are also non-formal mechanisms that people are using, given the fact that they don't have trust in the justice system. People will go to the church, to the family and all of that. So those are not necessarily reported. So those are some of the issues that we must begin to touch on as well and see. That's why we say there's a problem with the statistics. Certainly it's good that the ministers acknowledge that there's lawlessness, but the lawlessness is also linked, like I indicated earlier on, the issue of social exclusion, that's the first. But the second one is how the parenting part of it, because in large measure, many people who are involved in these violence acts are people who have seen the side of democracy, are people who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of this democratic dispensation, people who are benefiting around this whole school question of school nutrition, NEFSAS and all of that. But unfortunately, as soon as they exit the system, this issue of unemployment, is staring in their faces. They're supposed to be the breadwinners at the home and all of that. So there are no social amenities that are there for them to be able to, to utilize. So those are some of the things that, as a society, must start, engaging around. Sure.
And let's perhaps even just unpack that a moment. I mean, the cases that are being reported, Fina, where we're seeing rape kits not being present, for example, when women are reporting rape. We're also seeing cold cases that are never concluded. We're seeing police being accused of corruption and accepting bribes for, documents and cases going missing. Clearly, there's a problem even in our system.
Yeah, no, we do have a serious system failure in South Africa. The law is not applied, and even the TCCs that were supposed to be there to service women are not functional. So you have investments that have been made to try and get a system that is going, but the system is not functioning. And I think where we put energy and resources, we're failing women, because if you look at what is in the media around what is being investigated, it's people's bank accounts that are exposed. Why can't we use the same energy and resources to profile cases of women and of rape in the same magnitude as we do with politicians? Let me put it frank. We profile politicians a lot about their issues, and we forget that there are citizens that are every day facing sexual violence.
And I mean, speaking of those challenges, we're also seeing some of those stats coming through our screens right now. But also, Gerbrand, what shocked me was the number of murders that are committed by children. They're in their houses, and you would think these are innocent children that know absolutely nothing about committing a crime. Yes, bullying in school, fighting, we've heard those cases, but this is a call for concern.
Most definitely, and as one of my colleagues at the Institute has put it, we are the most dangerous country that is not currently in a war. If I have to compare murder rates across the world, the global average murder rate is 6. Out of 100,000. For the African continent, it is 13. Our murder rate at the moment now stands at 36. We are clearly failing. We've made advancements in the early 1990s, early 2000s, where we were able to halve our murder rate. But since then, there has been a reverse, especially from the 2011-2012 period. And I also, just to add to what my panelists said about the trust that we have in our institutions, the institutions of justice and the police, what we've seen since the 2011 period is that confidence or satisfaction in our police forces have declined. So in 2011, 64% of people polled by Status A were quite satisfied by the services that they received from the police. In the 2017 statistics, that figure has now dropped to 54%. Also, where police resources are being utilized at the moment is quite disproportionate. You are seeing more wealthier, better off areas getting more police protection and visibility. So the statistics also show by Status A that only a third of South Africans actually see a police vehicle once a week in their area. A quarter of South Africans never see a police vehicle in their area at all.
Yeah. And that's a concern. Let's also profile, some of the perpetrators that we're seeing here who are suspects in crime. Is it easy in 2019 in South Africa to identify a criminal? Back in the days, our parents used to warn us against, the person who looked dodgy, someone who doesn't perhaps look one in the eyes. But if children are committing crime, husbands are killing their wives, if there are incidents of the post office having crime in their own, offices or buildings, as we've seen with Uyini and Mkhwekana, is it easy in South Africa to now identify criminal, Selby?
In some instances, it is, because in most, let's take an example around the issue of femicide, for an example. This, in many instances, it happens, it's done by somebody that you know. And therefore, you could be able to profile that particular individual. The second one, in schools, certainly we lack instruments or tools in schools or resources such as your social workers, psychologists that are supposed to be assisting educators. So we've made our educators to be pseudo psychologists, and as a result, that becomes a problem as well. But in many instances, we could be able to profile. I think in communities, we need to go back to that communal life, So once we start saying in a community, you revive those state committees that are democratic, that's the first thing. Democratic, that are there to ensure that there's peace and safety amongst the communities. You could be able to identify individuals that are delinquent. The other thing is that, for an example, perhaps the other challenge is that, let's take it in the urban violence, for instance, where there's an occurrence of mob justice, is that in some instances people lose identity there. So, ordinarily you find a person who's very good in understanding, but when he sees a group, he loses his or her identity. That becomes a problem. So those are some of the things that we need to be able to look into.
All right, let's halt our conversation at that for now. We'll continue very soon. We're talking about crime statistics as were released today during the day by Police Minister Bheki Cele. We'll continue with our panel discussion on the crime figures in just a moment. Stay with us.